All right. Now, with all that in mind, let's talk about the main sentence types, and we're going to use English examples here, but I'm going to show you how to diagram these using what's called a Reed-Kellogg diagramming system. And because we're dealing with diagramming Hebrew sentences in this unit, I'm going to use the diagrams in right to left order as opposed to left to right order. So in this first example, we have a sentence type that I will refer to as an SV type, subject verb. What kind of sentences will this be? These will be sentences that contain an intransitive verb. So, no direct objects here. Jesus wept, Peter slept, the leper leapt. All of those have a subject slot being filled and a verb slot being filled. And that's all that's grammatically necessary. Okay? Now, if I were going to diagram this in English, I would draw a baseline, put a dividing line, and in English, the subject goes on the left, the verb goes on the right, because in English, I'm reading from left to right. If I'm going to put this into Hebrew, I'm going to do the same line, divide it, but the subject goes on the right, verb goes on the left. Okay, because in Hebrew, we're going from right to left. So Jesus wept would go like this. So if you have your handout, maybe you can just do this for fun. How would you diagram Peter slept? Do that real quick on your sheet. Is that what you all have here? Good. All of these sentences have the same structure because of the same sentence type. Now, what we're dealing with here are the obligatory sorts of elements when we label these sentence types. That is to say, if I had an adjunct, not a complement, if I had an adjunct like Jesus wept yesterday, what kind of a sentence type would this be? It would still be a subject-verb sentence type because the yesterday part is not obligatory. So when we're doing sentence types, we're really talking about obligatory types of constituents here. Now, I diagram it a little bit differently. The core would not be different. I would just put a modifier down under wept to indicate when he wept yesterday. All right, we'll talk about how to do that a little bit later. The next sentence type is subject, verb, direct object. So such verbs are going to have not intransitive, but transitive verbs, okay? The sentences will have transitive verbs. We will diagram these in the Hebrew order, again with our subject verb, with that line completely intersecting and going below the baseline here. But we're going to add the element of the direct object after the verb, and the line's going to stop on the baseline here. It doesn't intersect all the way. So, subject, verb, direct object. I eat butter. Jesus healed sinners. Martha burned the soup. Not all in that order, I don't suppose. But here you go. I eat butter. So how would you do Jesus healed sinners? Do that on your handout real quick. All right. Is this what you have? Jesus healed sinners. Should look like that. Now, if we were to do Martha burned the soup, I would have you put Martha burned, and we'd put the soup on the same little slot here. The reason being that in Hebrew, the article is attached directly to the noun. We're not going to separate those. Okay? If we were doing this in Greek, I would still keep the article there with that noun, just to simplify things. You could put the article underneath, and in your English sentence diagramming, if you did any of that when you were in grade school or junior high or high school, a lot of people put the article underneath the noun that it's modifying. Now, just a note here, some labeled the direct object as simply O for object. And consequently, they would call this sentence type just SVO instead of SVDO. I'm using DO here for direct object just to make it a bit more explicit. All right? Let's look at C here. The third type of sentence that we're looking at is an SVIODO. These are sentences that are going to have transitive verbs because there's a direct object involved here. But there's also going to be an indirect object. An indirect object that receives or is the beneficiary of the verbal action affecting the direct object. So I gave John butter. The thing I'm giving is butter. John is the recipient. I gave John butter. Martha made Jesus a meal. Martha made the meal. The beneficiary is Jesus. Jesus would be described by many grammarians here as an indirect object. Bert posed me a question. What did Bert pose? A question. To whom? Recipient? Me. Okay? Now, we're going to diagram it this way. You have your subject, verb, direct object, because these have subject, verb, direct object. The indirect object goes under the verb, and it's going to be from right to left, a line slanted down to the right, and then a baseline that has this overhang right there. Okay? If you were to just flip this up into its mirror image, it would almost look like a dollet with that little overhang. Remember that? Just like that. So anyhow, I gave butter, and John is the recipient. So I gave John butter. Another note here, as far as terms go, some grammarians would label the indirect object here as an object as well, just like they do the direct object. And so you might have SVOO, and that would be an indication that you might be looking at an indirect object and a direct object. Okay? I'm trying to clarify the functions of the object, so I'm using DO and IO to distinguish those. Now for D, we have SVSC. You know what SV means. SC, that's probably going to be new for some of you. This is the word or expression subject complement. And so we're going to have a special kind of verb for these. We're not using transitive or intransitive verbs. We're using linking verbs or copulas for the verb. The SC or subject complement is telling you what is being predicated or asserted about the subject. The AN or PP here stands for adjective, noun, or prepositional phrase. Okay? Noun, adjective, noun, or prepositional phrase. That is to say, I could assert that a subject is or was an adjective, pretty, a noun, subject is a man or a woman, or a prepositional phrase telling location. The subject is in the park. All right? Note, grammarians also frequently label the SC or the subject complement as a predicate nominative. So you've heard that expression. Predicate adjective when the subject complement is actually a noun or an adjective. Structurally, in English, the linking verb or copula most often comes between the subject and the subject complement. So if you think about our English ways of saying these sorts of things, you are beautiful. Notice my copula is between the subject and the subject complement here. You are beautiful. Here the subject complement is an adjective. Beautiful is an adjective. You are a woman. Here the subject complement is a noun. We are the world. Here the subject complement is a noun. Frodo is in the Shire. There the subject complement is the prepositional phrase, in the Shire. That's where he is. Now, how are we going to diagram these? Subject complements are going to go on the other side of the verb, but instead of a straight line, like we did with the direct objects, it will be leaning back towards the subject, because the subject complement really is telling you something about the subject, isn't it? It's telling you what the subject is or seems to be or something like that. Now, for E, here, just for fun, I know this is fun, right? Do we are the world. Just draw that on your sheet. Is that what you have? We are subject complement the world. Good. Now, SVDOOC, A or N. What in the world are we doing with this? This is fairly complicated, it seems, getting worse and worse. Here, each such sentences will contain a transitive verb. Why transitive? Because there's a direct object here. It's got to be transitive if there's a direct object. But the OC here does not mean obsessive compulsive. It means object complement. And it tells you what is being implicitly predicated about the direct object. Some grammarians will label the object complement as a predicate accusative if that's helpful to you. The A or N here means that the object complement could be an adjective or a noun. And in these types of sentences, there's an implied copular relationship between the object and the direct object and the object complement. Now let me tell you what I mean by this, okay? Because this is a little bit complicated. Take the sentence, I appointed David the king. Okay? David is not the king yet, and then I have the authority to go and appoint him, and as a result of that, he's now the king. So I appointed David to be the king. That's the idea here. So there's an implied copular relationship between David and king, where the object complement is, or David is the object complement now, right? David is the king. So I appointed David the king. I made my dog pretty. Okay, dog is the direct object, and what I made my dog to be is the object complement. The object complements are qualifying in some way what the direct object is as a result of this action. I dub thee night. I dub thee. Thee is the direct object, and what I dub thee to be is the night is the object complement. Okay, so object complements can be nouns or adjectives. If I have in such sentences subject, verb, direct, object, then I'm going to have all the same things in a subject, verb, direct, object sentence diagram, except I'm going to add the object complement over here. And notice that it looks like the subject complement. It's got that slanted line because what it is next to, okay, that's pointing back towards the thing that it describes. Just like with the subject complement, it's going all the way back in the direction of the subject. Okay, so I appointed David the king. In each of these examples, the result of the verbal action is such that the direct object is now, the copular idea, what the object complement indicates. David is now king. My dog is now pretty. You are now a knight. So there are only certain kinds of verbs that can do this. Verbs of naming, verbs of making, and such verbs. Okay, you can't just take any verb and make this kind of structure. Certain verbs have this kind of semantic structure. Okay? To dub. You can dub tapes, right? That's one meaning of dub. But if you dub someone to be something, then it's going to require three things: a subject, direct object, and an object complement. Okay,